Just breaking, the White House blasting those reports that FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe was actually forced out of his position. Sarah Huckabee Sanders saying just a short time ago right there that the decision was not made by the White House and the president had nothing to do with it. I am Trish Regan. Welcome, everyone, to the Intelligence Report. Joining me right now with reaction, Fox News contributor and former Utah congressman, Mr. Jason Chaffetz. Good to see you, Representative.
Thanks for having me.
What do you make of this? I mean, this is catching a lot of people by surprise here. Andrew McCabe leaving. Did that need to happen? Is it the right thing?
It probably is the right thing. I mean, we don't know the content of these materials, but you do have an Inspector General report, so he knows what's going to be in there because he was most likely interviewed, if not once, more than once. You also have the House Intelligence Committee getting ready to vote on what they might be releasing. There have been a lot of public reports about his involvement or non-involvement in certain things and what he did and did not do. And as best I can tell, he was coming close to retirement. So he may be very well just taking some leave that he had accumulated prior to that actual retirement. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
You know, what did you make of what was really perceived as a conflict with Mr. McCabe, and that was his wife's position? She was running for office, and his wife's campaign had received campaign funding from people associated with Hillary Clinton. And that comes, of course, amid news that we know there were people that were working at the FBI that felt very strongly she might be the next president of the United States. And if you recall the Lisa Page text with Peter Strzok, basically saying, hey, you know, we got to tread very carefully here because she could be our next boss. When you put two and two together here, do you start to come up with a case with this was a conflict that was serious enough for him not to have been running the investigation into Hillary Clinton and not to be having such a big position at the FBI at a time when there are lots of questions being raised about the president and his campaign?
Well, what was really telling to me when I was still in Congress and the chairman of the Oversight Committee, I found it interesting that Mr. McCabe, when his wife started to run, he put a recusal letter in place. He recused himself for all things that were happening in Virginia, and as best I recall, later he rescinded that. Now, he ended up getting a promotion, but why is it that he decided to recuse himself because of perceived conflict of interest, only to rescind that? He gets a promotion, and yet his wife goes on and accepts nearly $600,000 in a fundraiser. Now, look, your spouse can do other things. She can run for office. That's fine. But how you deal with that and how you recuse yourself or become involved and engaged, that is still an open question. The book's not shut on that, but the Inspector General is certainly looking at that. I know firsthand that he is looking at that. And it's all going to come to head. And so what we do in this country, we make it open and transparent. So we'll see what happens.
This may feed the fire, so to speak, in that there are a lot of people on the left that believe, this is all being orchestrated by Donald Trump and that he may have had a direct hand in firing him, and he may go on, if he had his way, to fire Robert Mueller. What do you make of those accusations right now? I mean, and the danger that this conspiracy theory gets fed?
Well, I don't think the president needed to do that. If the Democrats want to question people about that, I think he can go ahead and do that. That is a legitimate question. But don't presuppose the answer to that question. I would think that the Democrats would want to know as much about what did and did not happen within the FBI. Remember, when Donald Trump won the election, when Donald Trump actually was sworn in as the president, the Democrats were probably more adamant about, having Comey step down and holding him up on Comey up on Hatch violations than anybody. But somehow they've had a sea change here now because the supposed collusion regarding Russia doesn't seem to have many facts. But the collusion that may have been happening within the FBI and the intelligence community from a select few that were anti-Trump, that's all coming to a head, and that does come with facts, unlike what their allegations are.
That's scary stuff.
Yeah.
Very quickly before I let you go, Representative, what's your expectation for tomorrow night?
Well, look, I think the president has an amazing opportunity to, convey the State of the Union, which is pretty good right now. I do think he's going to talk about a lot of foreign policy. I think he's going to have to address what's going on with ISIS. But North Korea, I think you're going to hear more about in very stark terms, because we do have to deal with that. But the president's got a lot to tout tomorrow, and hopefully he doesn't just gloat about the past year, but sets a vision for where he wants to go with infrastructure, et cetera.
I have a feeling we'll be hearing a lot about that. It's so good to see you, Jason Chaffetz. Thank you
Thanks,
very much.